right, let's get started with today's edition of The Public Square. I'm Wayne Shepherd here. The team this week is Dave Zanotti, Alan C. Duncan, our producer, Rob Walgate, and Melanie Elsey. And a newspaper caught our attention. Newspaper article, Dave.
Yeah, Wayne, do you ever get a little curious about what's going to happen next here on the Public Square?
I like to be surprised.
Yeah, newspaper article. Just happens to be an article in the Washington Post.
Although it was longer like a book, wasn't it?
Well, I think Melanie charted it. I think this might be the world record for the longest Washington Post article ever written about another human. What do you think?
I went to print it out. It's like, wow, this is 57 pages. But even if you take out the pictures and the graphics, that the language, the type was still margin to margin. It had to have been a 40-page article. They couldn't possibly print it in their print version of the paper. It would have to be only online. So
here we go. What human subject would merit 40 pages printed out and just this gigantic exclusive? Well, it's titled "Relentless Wrestler." So you're thinking, whoa, WAPO did 40 pages on the World Wrestling Federation? What is this? No, it's an article about Jim Jordan. And then my task was to assign it for reading for the whole staff, and then I had to add about another 3 pages of introductory comments on it. I didn't make it any better, for which I apologize, but just so that everyone would know that all the people around the table have, in fact, consumed the material, and we're all about an inch shorter than we were when we started reading it. And it does merit our attention. So this is about Jim Jordan. And I think a lot of America is concerned right now because Jim's name has been in the news a lot. And of course, everyone now knows that he made an attempt by placing his name in nomination for the Speaker of the House, and that after 3 votes, he withdrew because he wasn't able to garner a majority. So what's interesting about that is there were a number of other people who have had these kinds of opportunities. I didn't see a 40-page article or however many pages it turned out in print, about Steve Scalise. I'm not even sure Kevin McCarthy got this much ink from the Washington Post. So I'm asking myself, I wonder why it is that they are suddenly so interested in Jim Jordan. And what's even more interesting is we know this story very well. We know the Jim Jordan story because Jim Jordan, actually, Wayne, years ago, I can remember the first time that Jim Jordan ever set foot in our office in Columbus, Ohio. I remember that well. In fact, Jim Jordan actually started his career in politics circulating term limits petitions in 1992 when he was a homeschool dad and an assistant wrestling coach at Ohio State University. And Melanie, your story with Jim, you were telling us earlier when you first met him.
I remember first meeting Jim at his house, actually. I had heard we had a new state rep in the Ohio House of Representatives that was a home educating dad, and we were home educating. I was actually at a meeting south of Columbus, and I called him, and I just introduced myself and asked if I could swing by his house on my way north to meet him. And so I met him and his wife, Polly, and their 4 children were little. And it was a really sweet introduction to who he is. And who he was then and is now, not much difference. He's the same. Jim will always be Jim.
Well, that seems to be what the Washington Post was trying to say. The difference is we seem to have a rather positive feeling about the guy we met all those years ago and have watched grow up in this process. But the Washington Post seems to think that he's somewhere between, Alan, how did you say it? He was somewhere between an alien and...
The way they were describing wrestling and wrestlers and athletes in general, it seemed they were shocked that he could have so much energy or that he could work out so much. And I'm like, that's a type of person. You know, it was just like they had never hung out with an athlete before. They just kept describing his toes were tapping and he was running stairs, and I've never seen such a thing.
But it's one of those things when it comes to athletics. I feel like everyone's seen a football field. Everyone's seen a basketball court. You've seen a baseball diamond. We've seen all these things, but not everyone's been inside a wrestling room because you don't see a wrestling room on television. So if you haven't been in a wrestling room, I'm not sure you can get the visual of what a wrestling room is really like.
That's a fair point. It is, and the article does make mention that wrestling is an ancient sport. I mean, this is one of the first sports ever and one of the most pure. So, but it is. You do have to be a little bit weird, a little bit of a different breed to do it, but many people do it, and especially in Northeast Ohio.
Yeah, and I'm not knocking those that do it. I mean, it's intense. And listen, if you experience a wrestling room and you're not cut out for it, you exit quickly. If you want to stay there, you're going to have to live up to it. Alan, you spend time in a wrestling room with one of your boys, right?
Oh yes, yeah, my 8-year-old, and that's when they said Jim started at age 8. I got an 8-year-old wrestling in the St. Ed's wrestling room right now, hoping to be there. So,
boy, okay, so let's.
And he is a little bit of a wild man, but you know what? I want a wild man representing me in Congress sometimes. I got to say.
Who knows? A would-be speaker, yeah.
You never know.
That'll teach you tenacity, that's for sure.
That's right.
Well, one thing I'm certain of is that growing up through high school and junior high and high school and playing athletics at all different levels, I got to tell you, nobody messed with the wrestlers. Period. I mean, as much as we worked out and thought how tough we were on a football team and blah, 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 those guys were out of their minds. And their coaches were flat out nuts. I mean, I can remember wrestling coaches who also were like assistant football coaches. No, you did not want to be anywhere near those people. Intensity is, and I don't mean like they're socially rejected or something. I just mean if you're in an athletic competition and that coach tells you to jump, you darn well better say how high on your way down, because I mean, those guys are, they do stuff nobody else is willing to do. And it's an individual sport also, which is interesting. Yes, it's a team sport. I understand all that. But it's about what you do out there. And so it's a different world. Well, the Washington Post decided to define Jim Jordan as a wrestler. And at points, you began to think maybe he wasn't human any longer, the way that they intensely focused on the characteristics of what it takes to be not just a wrestler, but a high school state champion, a national NCAA champion time and time again, and one match away from being an Olympian. So what's there in America right now? A couple dozen people that are carrying those kinds of credentials right now. So yeah, this is a different kind of person. But here's the first thing I want to talk about the WAPO article. I think they wrote this article because they were convinced he was going to become the next speaker. And that this was the very first article they were going to drop on his head to diminish his credibility if he had succeeded in being elected Speaker of the House. Because since he's out of the race and has been out of the race a couple of days before they published the article, it looks to me like in this case, they decided to drop this on his head to bury him. Because there's no way to come out of the end of this article without having some real questions based upon the stuff that they wrote about. So why? Why were they so concerned about Jim Jordan? Why did they feel the need to bury him?
He's a threat to the institution. They view him as a threat. I viewed this article as they've been compiling it for obviously years. And it's like, famous people have their obituaries all written right now, right? And so when they die, someone can just hit print from all these major media organizations and be like, oh yeah, because they already had it done. I feel like this is what the Post did here. Like they had it written and they realized he wasn't going to be speaker and they're like, oh no, what do we do with this now? Will we ever be able to release this? So let's just release it. I think that's what happened.
But it was designed to be a hit piece.
Yes.
And they stretched. They stretched that piece as far as they could.
Well, one of the comments that was made, we were in staff, and somebody picked up in the article that they carefully noted that Jim Jordan was born 7.5 months after his parents were married.
Yeah, that
who cares?
Yeah, that's added in like what?
That's how desperate they were to do a hit.
So we're going back to this guy's birth origins, and without using words that they can't put in print to this day, or we can't use on the radio, what they're trying to say was something else. Wayne, I missed that one, but the staff caught that one.
Yeah, I missed that little detail in the article when I read it too.
Yeah. So Jim Jordan's obviously a threat. And what we want to talk about is there's a lot of disappointment or concern or questions about the fact that how would somebody like Jim Jordan get to the point of being the Speaker of the House and then not get there? Well, let's just take for a second and rehearse, before we get into that part, how far Jim came. And by the way, this is not because we're Republicans, because I'm not a Republican. And it's actually not because I really care all that much whether Jim was Speaker of the House or not. Quite honestly, I didn't view it as a top priority in my world. So this isn't about some sense of disappointment. What is quite remarkable, though, is to understand where he started as a homeschool dad, as an assistant part-time wrestling coach. And he decided that he was going to get into politics, getting himself elected as a state rep, and then becoming a state senator, and then running for Congress and getting elected in Congress, and then working his way up. The guy's worked his way up out of nowhere. He's worked his way up. No one's ever helped him. Even worse than that, the Republican Party in the state of Ohio has always opposed Jim. He has always run against incumbents that were establishment candidates before it was cool. And he's always outworked all of his opponents to succeed. He's never been the darling of the National Republican Party or even the state Republican Party in Ohio. He's always run against the institution.
Well, that's our topic on the Public Square today, and we've got a lot of ground to cover, so you stay with us.
Spreading the light of liberty across the land. Now back to the Public Square.
We are the Public Square. Great to have you listening as always. And we are online, by the way, as most of you know, thepublicsquare.com. But did you know there's also a free smartphone app you can use with your tablet computer or your smartphone? Just go online to your app store and look for The Public Square. It's free, and you can download these programs and take them with you on the go to listen at your convenience. All right, we saw this article in the Washington Post about Congressman Jim Jordan, and it got some thoughts flowing around here. So, Dave, take it away.
Well, we've known Jim for a long time. In fact, some of us know him so long, I bet that there's people working at the Washington Post that weren't even born from the time we first got to meet and know Jim Jordan. He's been at it for a long time. The thing about Jim running against the establishment was that it wasn't that he ran against the establishment because he had any sugar daddies in the background. He has never been carrying the water of corporate America. I mean, Jim got into politics before, oh boy, I'm just going to have so much fun saying this and I can't resist it. But before Mark Zuckerberg even dreamed about being a billionaire, Jim Jordan was actually in the State House of Representatives serving. Before Apple was the monster that it was in Silicon Valley, was trying to eat all of the world, Jim Jordan was serving as a state rep. Jim Jordan was never the darling of any of the machine politics of the Republican world. He never carried the water. He went walking around door to door. And the people he had made relationships with over life and schools and at home and at church, he and his neighbors decided they wanted a state rep, so they got them one, and Jim was willing to serve.
Dave, he's the definition of grassroots.
Yeah.
He's the definition of starting from the bottom up and making it work.
And what's interesting is that at each step of the way, as a state rep, that was one size task, and he conquered it. At state senate, that's a 3 times larger task, and he conquered it. To go to Congress is 3 times greater than that in regards to the size of the districts and the vote counts. And every time, Jim Jordan, that guy that the Washington Post just couldn't describe as a toe-tapping, coffee-drinking, manic personality, just outworked everybody else and overcame the establishment. He was never able to match them with funding. He matched them with hard work and with passionate supporters. And because he's always had his own constituency that he built from the ground up, the party's never been able to knock him off. They've even tried to redistrict him. They've moved his district a number of times. They just can't get rid of the guy. And I mean, there's people who trust Jordan and vote for him who don't even necessarily agree with all the positions that he holds. They just know he's different. He's a different kind of guy. So we watched Jim rise through the ranks, and he decided to stay in Congress longer than we wanted him to. And of course, he didn't ask our permission, and we didn't talk with him about this program today. This is not preset. And no, he's not going to be appearing. We're talking about him today. Maybe that's the luxury of considering him a friend. In Jim's case, we watched him climb up through the ranks in the House of Representatives. Now, I will tell you candidly, I've told Jim a number of times I wish he'd come home. I think he's been there too long. I think once you get past 6 terms in the Congress, you really should get out. Because here's what it comes down to. To make a career out of Congress is a very difficult thing to do and maintain who you really are, because it is such a brutal environment. It is not like anything else in America. It transforms your reality, and you end up morphing into what that system is all about. And we actually care about Jim and Polly, and we don't want any human to become like that. What it takes to actually go forward. Now, I'm not here to judge Jim's character or his decisions. He doesn't ask my permission, or any of our permission. But we thought it would be smart for him to come home. I still think it would be smart for Jim to come home. But Jim saw the opportunity to become the Judiciary Committee chairman in the U.S. House, and because Jim worked his way up through school to get a master's degree and then to get a law degree. He cares immensely about the proper role of the American judiciary and of constitutional law. He thought he could serve his nation and his constituency well by serving as chairman of the House Judiciary Committee, and that opportunity came his way. He paid his dues. He's been there too long, but he got that job. Now, my personal opinion, why should mine matter more than anybody else's? I worry about him because to keep that job, he's got to stay there. And staying there comes at a very expensive price. It's a hard place to live. Did you all notice in the article how he now has finally admitted out loud that he sleeps in his office on a cot? Yeah.
Well, he did that when he first got there.
Yeah,
But no,
He didn't want to waste taxpayer money on an apartment, and they had everything they needed right there in the building that his office was located. So,
well, and he didn't want anybody to know that because he's afraid that the IRS would somehow come after him from another idea that you're not allowed to sleep in the Capitol or something. And,
Well, there's also a security aspect to that, isn't there?
well, and that's how things have changed, Wayne, because when he first went up and was doing that, it was because he just didn't want to be a part of that whole weird underground world of D.C. and all the corruption that's involved. And here he is, a guy with a wife and kids, and he's away from home, and he wants to take every precaution to make sure that everything works the way it's supposed to. Well, he's not the only one that does that. But now things have changed. Now, he and Polly did have an apartment for a while in D.C., but they gave it up. They gave it up because Jim was literally afraid for his life. Now, this is a guy who's not afraid of much. I can guarantee you he's not afraid to give his life, but he's afraid someone was going to take away his life from his wife and his children, because Jim could have been on that baseball field the day that Steve Scalise and those other congressmen got shot. Jim's name was on the list that the shooter wanted to kill. Jim Jordan literally stays on a cot in the Capitol because he's afraid he's going to get shot. He said it in the article.
Yeah. Dave, earlier you asked why the Washington Post was seemingly against Jim here, and part of it has to be his support of the former president, doesn't it?
Yeah, and
or the work on the judiciary. He's plowed a lot of ground in terms of getting the documentation and the appropriate witnesses for this and that they're following. So he's been an effective person on the judiciary, whether he was the chair or the minority.
Hey, Melanie, let me ask you a question. Is Jim Jordan smart enough to be chairman of the Judiciary Committee?
10 times over, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
He just, I don't know. I thought Woipo was trying to tell us he's just a dumb wrestler. I didn't know. I just wanted to be sure I understood that. Yeah. So I think, Wayne, you're right. They don't like the fact he supports Donald Trump. They don't like the fact that he defended the president in regards to impeachment. They don't like the fact that the Judiciary Committee is looking into potential impeachable offenses against President Biden. Yeah, WAPO's a left-wing progressive organization, and Jim's not. So we expect there are going to be adversaries at every point in the process. Question is, did the Washington Post play fair? And let's talk about now the elephant in the room. Sorry for the pun. But the fact that the Washington Post decided in this process to bring back a story that's very old. It goes back, some 30 years?
We're talking 80s and 90s.
Yeah. When Jim was 23 years old, let's set the scene. Jim was 23 years old. He was a part-time assistant wrestling coach at Ohio State University. This NCAA multiple champion, got a wrestling job. What was the wrestling job? Assistant coach at the age of 23 in a very large wrestling program at the Ohio State University. Now, okay, so he's a drop of sand in a very large bucket in regards to the campus of Ohio State University and all that means in regards to the athletic department. So this is where he is. He's 23 years old. He's got 4 little kids, or I think he may have had, I didn't think he had 4 kids by that time. He had kids at home. And he's trying to make a living basically doing what he does best, which is wrestling and coaching wrestling. So this is where we pick up Jim Jordan. And if you could imagine the size of Ohio State University, it was huge then. And that there are scores of athletic departments. There are thousands of employees connected to the Ohio State athletic departments at this stage in the game. And here's one little part-time employee working there. Now, what ends up happening is the Washington Post tries to build a scandal out of what is a legitimate scandal, in that there was a medical doctor who was a professor in the College of Medicine who had a habit of inappropriately conducting himself with athletes, particularly male athletes. And they cite multiple testimonies of wrestlers who claimed that they were abused by this doctor. Now, this is a matter that has been litigated. There have been significant legal settlements, and there's still litigation involving this. It's a controversy now that the entire university is involved in as far as their legal staff. There's big Washington law firms involved. And Washington Post tries to recast the story as if there was one person in Columbus, Ohio, who could have stopped it. Anybody know who that would have been?
The assistant coach in his early to mid-20s.
Yeah.
The
Jim
drop
Jordan.
of sand.
The drop of sand. Now, we'll come back and talk more about that in a minute because it is a significant part, and I want to make it clear that the Washington Post didn't just mention it. They mentioned it, then they mentioned it again, and then they closed with it, as if to say, this is who Jim Jordan really is.
All right, we're going to take a break, and there's some more to talk about here, of course, and we want you to stay tuned, and you can always hear this program online at thepublicsquare.com. Thanks for your support of the American Policy Roundtable. There's much happening around here, including Christmas in America, which isn't far away, and I've noticed the information is now online at thepublicsquare.com, so check that out. We'll be back with The Public Square. Glad to have you along for the Public Square today as we take a look at this newspaper article, the Washington Post article about Congressman Jim Jordan, which was published after his run for the speakership of the House was rejected by his fellow House members. And Dave, we've got more to talk about.
Yeah, we're going to get to that very process because that's really where we want to spend most of the balance of our time. But we just can't get away from the fact of this Washington Post article, which was really designed to either hit Jim had he won the speakership or now simply to bury him, to one more time try to make this guy go away. The story that they're bringing up is not a new story. It came out of NBC News New York and I will warn you that any story that comes up out of NBC News, New York, watch out for. Because that's kind of like the center of the Comcast world of everything that's left. So this came up, and it came up several years ago, and it was trotted around and reported on. And Jim has his side of this story, which he's been very consistent with. But he's been challenged by wrestlers who were there. Now, understand the wrestlers that were there, Jim was started right after he got out of the University of Wisconsin. He came and began as an assistant coach. He wasn't much older than these guys. But I want to also remind you that everyone involved with this story was a legal adult. Every person that's involved. We're not talking about children in grade school. We're talking about college athletes and people who are professionals. All right, and so these are all grown-up adults. As the story goes, this particular doctor, who is now dead, he committed suicide, who the university has been paying settlements for, because it's crystal clear now upon evidence, not just from the wrestling department, but from multiple other departments where this medical physician, who was a member of the medical teaching staff at Ohio State University, also was on staff for the athletic department, that this man was guilty of doing things he should not have been doing. And behind closed doors and settlements, I do not have the details except to know that these things have happened. This has been a long, ongoing point of embarrassment and a serious need for reconciliation with the university. Okay. It's interesting that the article doesn't mention any other assistant coaches in the entire athletic department other than Jim Jordan. Now, I've talked to an athlete who was actually at Ohio State University, who was actually in these very departments, who actually competed and lettered for Ohio State University. And at this period of time, the facility, let's just put it this way. Rob, you said earlier, has anybody ever been in a wrestling room? I will tell you that where this was happening, where these people were training and their locker room and their showers and everything else, this was pretty ancient. All right. I'm not saying it was barbaric, but it wasn't a place that you invited guests to.
It wasn't, but it was known at Ohio State as where people could come in as well, kind of off the street, where it wasn't an isolated place for just the wrestling team. There were others that were known to frequent the showers and other things at this rec hall.
So this is the 90s, and this is a squirrely setup here. There's no doubt about it. And now Ohio State's having to pay for, I think, I'm not going to use any terms because this is in litigation, and I'm not going to impugn guilt or innocence upon anyone. I'll tell you, they're working on it, and there's plenty of lawsuits. But not only are there no other assistant coaches ever mentioned by WAPO or NBC News or anybody else that's covered this, but now they do mention the head coach. All right, they do mention the head coach, and somehow he doesn't have anywhere near the responsibility that Jim Jordan has. So the 23-year-old kid, the 25-year-old kid, the 27-year-old kid, he was supposed to solve the problem, but the head coach, they never
the whole
indict
premise
him.
is ridiculous. The whole premise is it doesn't even carry a smidgen of believability. It's ridiculous.
It's like a comic book that's being written backwards. It just makes no sense at all. And I mean, all I can imagine is if Jim had said something and tried to stop whatever,
or if he had known
being alleged, if he had tried. And he was running for Speaker of the House, the same article would have been appeared, but they would have called him a homophobe for saying something. I mean, they were going to go get Jim based on this evidence, no matter what the evidence led to, because this whole piece was about getting Jim. And it's been around a number of times. So they're bringing it back again, just bigger and louder and in page upon page upon page. Okay, most of the people that are making allegations as it relates to Jim Jordan, they have issues. Most all of them have been in pursuit of a civil remuneration. They're looking for moneyed settlements. All of these issues, and Jim was never accused of doing anything illegal, unethical. If anything, he was accused of going home too soon. He would literally get away from the place. There's never been moral propriety involved here at all. But Washington Post is trying to incriminate him because these people who want a settlement are saying Jordan knew more than he's led on to, and he did nothing. And of course, which Jim denies across the board. You can read his own defense. We wanted to bring this up because it just tells you the price that people have to pay when you decide you want to challenge the status quo in American public life and American public policy, and particularly in the Congress of the United States. You better believe that they are going to do everything they can. Who's they? The Washington Post, owned by Jeff Bezos and Amazon. The Washington Post, the New York Times. We could go on. We could list all of those people that control the media. They're going to do everything they can to destroy you. And they'll destroy you whether you're on the right or on the left if they think you threaten their power base or that you've gotten too big for yourself. They're not about reporting facts. They're about picking winners and losers. And in their opinion, you can't be a bigger loser than Jim Jordan. So they had to find a way to make him a loser.
I thought what was interesting about this piece as well is obviously the amount of time that's passed, the things that have happened, not going after all set of facts or evidence presented in the same way, but the fact that to tear down Jim Jordan and his credibility, they went to none other than John Boehner. That's who they went to
That cracked
find.
me up.
And I'm like scratching my head. I'm like, you know, did you have that on your bingo card that the Washington Post would go to John Boehner as like a credibility witness, as an expert in a field of attacking? I left shaking my head.
So, yeah, let's now turn this to the politics of what is really going on here. And that's that Jim Jordan has been climbing the ladder and winning. When Jim Jordan was first elected to Congress, I would guess that he probably had about 12 colleagues that he could caucus with, so to speak, to speak about the things that really were going on in regards to a conservative worldview, an understanding of the founding first principles of America. It was pretty lonely up there. Then Jim and a bunch of people got together and they started the House Freedom Caucus. And then there was about 20 of them. And before too long, there was about 40 of them. And Jim continued to climb up in committee assignments and appointments. And, you know, when the House was in majority control of Republicans, then Jim had more to do like everybody else. And then when they were in the minority, he had less to do. But the numbers, Americans continued to send more people like Jordan to Congress over the last 18 years. Well, Jim now made a decision to run for the House speakership. And golly, he got about 190 people who voted for him. I can remember when he didn't have 12 that would have voted for him for anything, let alone hold the door open for him on the elevator. So 190 people said, yeah, this guy's qualified to be Speaker of the House. This is the homeschool part-time wrestling coach dad who started off walking the streets as a state rep in Ohio, 190 votes to be Speaker of the House and Chairman of the House Judiciary Committee. But guess what? You're only allowed to go so far until WAPO comes after you. And that's why a lot of people never start the journey in the first place, because they know that if you challenge the status quo sufficiently, they're going to bury you if they can.
And that is the disheartening thing. You know, none of us know what happened at Ohio State back in the 90s, other than just what we read. But how many of us, if you think back into your life, think, oh man, I really wish that wouldn't be printed in a newspaper, you know, some stupid decision you made in high school.
Or for someone to twist into something that it isn't.
Yes. Yeah, that or that. And so, but that's going to keep you from running for office, even though you're a middle-aged person. Yeah, it's a sad state of affairs.
Sorry to have to break in, but we do need to take a break. Alan, you understand that. You've got to produce this program. So let's take that break and come back. This is The Public Square, online, thepublicsquare.com.
We'll be right back for more on The Public Square.
Let's continue with The Public Square now. We're talking about this Washington Post article on Jim Jordan, Congressman Jordan. And Rob, you picked up some things in the article.
Well, you know, knowing congressman through the work here at the roundtable and seeing, I guess when he was a state lawmaker and knowing the fact of, as he was at Ohio State, I believe he was earning his master's. And then when he got elected, he went to law school and was getting his law degree. And the fact that, when you look at the state house in almost every state, I'm sure the hotels and the bars and the restaurants are bustling with lawmakers after session, and they're wheeling and dealing, and lobbyists are there. And Jim Jordan drove home every night. He didn't stick around to schmooze with anybody. He didn't want to be part of that. He went home. So was he viewed as an outsider? Yes. I mean, even when he made it to Congress, there was talk during redistricting that they were going to try and find a way to carve him out. And the Republicans had control of drawing the districts, but they were the ones who he irritated a fair word. He irritated his own party because of what he did.
At the same time, I could count maybe on one hand the people that I respect most in terms of their work ethic, their principles, and there are people you don't want to you go thinking I'm not going to compromise principles. This is a person who has been consistent his entire professional career on principles.
And I want to tell you, I've never heard Jim Jordan. I've been in a lot of different situations where he's been involved. I have never heard Jim Jordan talk down to a group of people. I've never heard him ever lecture somebody about their moral failures or get in their face, some moralizing. Jim Jordan walks in the room, and every person who's more than 5 pounds overweight is completely intimidated. That's for starters. Okay. Number two, everyone who thinks they work really hard by the time Jim gets done talking feels intimidated because Jim outworks everybody. He's that kind of guy. Anyone who's, have lots of problems with moral fidelity feels guilty, even though Jim never even talks about that, because you see the manifestation of a faithful life. Look, the guy's intimidating because he does right stuff.
Was it Donald Trump that called him maniacal with his workouts on in the congressional gym?
And if you were ever happen to be in a gym and Jim Jordan walks in, just walk out. Okay.
Yeah. I do have a question for you though. Would we all be better served if more members of Congress had cauliflower ear? Like, would we be better off as a country if that was the case? We need more wrestlers down there because they're going to get stuff done.
And then that's the place of further intimidation, because Jim Jordan has built a career in Congress as an outsider who continues to challenge the Republican establishment. John Boehner makes no bones about how he feels about Jim Jordan in this article, and we can't repeat the language that Boehner uses. And why? That's because Jim Jordan had the courage to stand up to John Boehner. Now, I know what that's like because I've stood up to John Boehner, and he doesn't like it. He doesn't like it at all. I can tell you, there's stories that people can tell, and Jim's not one of those people that's going to tell those stories out of school. So there you go. I mean, so why bother? Why bother running for public office? Because they're only going to get you in the end. No, let me explain something to you. The only people that look really stupid after this article is the Washington Post. I urge everybody to read it. I really do. I mean, it's a laugh fest. You've got to read it. But at this point's the bigger problem. Let's go back to the ascendancy of Jordan's career and the numbers that have been growing as well. There is a strong movement in this country to try to put conservative thinking people in the House of Representatives. All you have to do is look at the last election. Well, there was no red wave. Oh, forget that nonsense, please. You never heard it here on the public square, and you're never going to hear it. But we will talk to you about the total vote count at the end. That's all the people who voted in 2020 for Republicans, or excuse me, in 2022 for Republicans, and all the people who voted for Democrats. And the Republicans got more votes across the entire country than did the Democrats. Now, I'm not a Republican, and I'm not a Democrat. So the only reason that number is worth understanding is because it is a genuine poll of who wanted what view of politics more. And the Republicans won that contest. They may lose the next one. But the fact is they have been gaining in numbers. It's an ebb and flow. It has been since World War II. But to think that there are not people in this country that prefer more conservative governance than liberal governance is a lie. It's propaganda. Now, the contest is clearly very, very close. But the reason that Jim lost wasn't a contest about Republicans and conservatives in regards to R's and D's. Jim lost because 20 Republicans wouldn't support him. Not the Democrats. He didn't get a single Democrat vote. It was 20 Republicans that tanked him. Do you know that those 20 Republicans are basically the Progressive Party? The Progressive Party has at least 20 members of the Republican Congress in their party and all of the Democrats. We've talked a lot here about being free agents, about letting your principles override any party affiliation that you might have. I have to tell you, the progressives do that much better than conservatives do. Because there are 20 progressives who made sure that Jim Jordan didn't get to the speakership, and they're all Republicans. And this has been going on for a long, long time. So it is significant that when Jim showed up, there were not very many people that he would caucus with. And just a few days ago, he had 190 of them, almost made him speaker. But let's be very careful. It was the Republicans, the progressive Republicans, that kept him out. Now, here's where this gets tricky. Most people would say, great, let's get rid of those 20 and get real conservatives in, and then the problem's solved. No, it's not going to work that way. And it's not going to be that easy. Because the biggest problem than all the other things we've talked about right now is the United States Congress has become an organization that fights over the largest budget in the world, and they do it solely as two competitors, the Republicans versus the Democrats. Our country was never designed to be this. Never. And until someone says out loud that we cannot continue fighting as D's versus R's over the life of our nation, we have to find some way not to come together in a kumbaya session. We have to elect some group of people that will deconstruct the falsehood that Congress is just about fighting over the money and over the power. There has to be someone in there that's willing to serve the republic, and enough of them in majority numbers that whether they're Democrats, Republicans, independents, or Martians, it doesn't matter, that somehow the national interest rises above the control of the federal budget and the administrative state. That's, by the way, why those progressives voted against Jim, because they're for the state.
You know, and to see the work that's being done by the state, to see that's what Jim has been going after this entire time, that entity being threatened, no matter if you have an R or D next to your name, that's why you view him as an opponent. The problem is the tenacity he used on the wrestling match. He then takes to committee hearings. He takes on the campaign trail, and he takes on this persona. I think that's when you've sat in a room with him, he has that pit bull mentality, but when he sits in the room, he's always willing to listen and have the conversation.
Hey, look, I'm all for Jim switching to decaf, okay? I'm okay with that. All right, it's okay.
That was interesting. That how early in life that coffee drinking began, when it was the old school cut weight days in the wrestling room. I mean, and that was very evident in the article as well. What was it? Whole wheat bread? Was it whole wheat bread? And,
yeah. Well,
coffee,
we should all just be glad that his wife got him to switch from drinking Mountain Dew.
Mountain Dew and coffee. Mountain Dew mixed with it. That's right.
With orange juice
with
in
orange
the morning.
Juice.
Yeah.
Mountain Dew with orange juice.
Yeah. So okay, we can get that part. But now, what are we the people supposed to do about this? And that's really where we've got to get to. You have heard us say this over and over again, and this isn't easy. And look, the political reality of America is if we keep doing the same thing we've been doing for the last 50 years, we're going to continue to get the same results. And for the last 50 years, what we've done is divide America between shirts and skins, reds and blues, D's and R's, and then had a power struggle, and whoever got one more vote than the other guy got to control the whole situation. Now, that is a very risky business because these parties now have become power brokers unto themselves. So how do we address that? Let's talk more about it.
And we will in a moment on the public square. For those who have to leave us at this time, that's why we have archived this program online at thepublicsquare.com, or you can use the smartphone app to listen there. But don't miss the next few minutes. Stay with us if you can.
We will be right back for more on the public square. Spreading the light of liberty across the land. Now back to the public square.
What are we the people to do? Let's talk about that here on the public square. Not so much about the personalities involved, but more strategy, Dave.
Well, here's the strategy. The reason that WAPO hates Jim Jordan, the reason that the progressive 20 who masquerade inside the Republican Party, and I say masquerade because they don't agree with the Republican agenda whatsoever. And for that matter, to be honest with you, the Republicans put on a great show every convention, and they've been doing platforms to satisfy conservatives since the 90s, but they don't live by them. So a lot of this is kind of masquerade. But what we really need is we need people who believe in America as it was founded, the Declaration, the Constitution, and who can't be bought. We need those people to go represent us again. The answer to this whole problem is radical simplification. Yeah, radical simplification. The people in power with all the money have made this too complicated. It's not that we're not smart enough to see what they're doing. We see what they're doing real clear. They've kept it so complicated to tell the rest of us, go away, kids. You bother us. We've got it from here. Give us your money. Give us your taxes. We got it from here. Go enjoy your Netflix. Go enjoy your football games. Go to your vacations. You just go enjoy being an American. We got it handled from here. Let me tell you something. That's the same kind of things that mob bosses tell people. And that's exactly what this group of people acts like. This is a syndicate, friends. Our Congress has become a syndicate. Somebody said that out loud. Well, unless you want me to lie to you, what else are we going to say? We got to break the syndicate. And how do you do that? You break it from the bottom up. You know what we need? We need 100 more Jim Jordans that won't be bought.
Actually, that is a perfect way to simplify sort of the litmus test for who you're going to support for Congress, whether it be your own district or if you're going to give your time or financial support to someone 5 states away. Because you can support any candidate at any time, regardless of where you live. So do we look at the 20 who, as a test case? I'm looking at the list of the 20 and who they voted for Speaker. 3 of them voted for Lee Zeldin, who isn't even in Congress. A few of them voted for McCarthy, who was just voted out. Those are throwaway votes. That's junk votes. It doesn't even make sense that you wouldn't cast your vote for someone who's there, who's the hardest working guy in your caucus. So for me, it would be a litmus test. Are you going to be like Jim Jordan or not? If you're not going to be like Jim Jordan, then I'm not going to support your campaign.
Well, and I know, Melanie, how well our ears are trained, our necks are trained, our eyes are trained to think that this is a discussion about inside Republicanism. No. I'd be happy for 20 people who couldn't be bought who are Democrats. I'd be happy for 20 people who couldn't be bought who are independents. I'd be happy for 20 as Republicans. I don't care. I don't care where they come from. What we need are free agents, again, who are willing to say this system is too complicated, it is too corrupt, we need to get back to the Declaration, back to the Constitution, and we need voters that are willing to be free agents and to walk away from the lie that America is a two-party system. If we keep living in that lie, this country is going to be destroyed. We're on the path to perdition right now. The country was not built to be controlled by 2 competing political parties. That's what George Washington told us. That's what John Adams told us and warned us about. We've let the government get too big and our interests get too small. We've got to go back to the bottom and put people in who can't be owned.
And that's why I find it interesting that WAPO used John Boehner, because they seem to be happy or content with having it be both parties in the way it is now and just let them be. They're in essence wearing different colored uniforms, but they're the same team. They're that establishment team. So they were okay to use that because Jim Jordan and others that think like him may upset the apple cart and try and change how the game is played, the dynamic of it.
We said something in staff meeting earlier that triggered a thought in my memory. I remember being in a state school board meeting where they were describing local control of schools. And the state superintendent described it as top-down, bottom-up. Top-down, we decide what they do, and bottom-up, they figure out how to do what we say. That's not local control. And what we said in staff meeting is, going back to where we should be as a nation in the way the founders had envisioned everything, right now it's like trying to run up the down escalator instead of starting at the bottom. It's so much easier to start at the bottom and ride up.
Look, I'm very well, Wayne. We've been at this for 43 years. I am painfully aware that this message isn't simple, and for people that are looking for simple answers or non-expensive answers, this is not satisfying, because we would like to believe we could give it the office, we could cast our vote, and then someone's going to go ahead and do what we hope they'll be doing. Look, we're in trouble, friends. We have abandoned so much power to a Congress that is now in control of so much money that if we don't send free-thinking, free agents from every party or no party into Congress, we're in big trouble. Now, how do you do that? Number one, you might now, for most of you, the answer to this is no. For most of us, the answer to this is no. For me, the answer to this is no. But somebody's got to run. We need to have a couple of hundred somebodies running every single election for congressional seats. Whether you win or not, the fact that you're running changes things, and it matters. Now, it'd be really good if you were qualified, if you had a network of friends that would be willing to support you, if you had a well-defined worldview, because if you don't know who you are before you run for Congress and you get elected, you won't know. You won't know who you are, and no one else will 12 years later. This place will morph you and mess you up huge. But if God is calling you to public service, and you've got experience and you have a network, you should seriously consider running. And we don't care what party or no party that you run. The members that are owning this system right now need to understand people want the system back. Don't talk about get your country back. People want the system back. They want Congress back to be responsive and representative again. The problem with this whole discussion, please, I hope everyone will hear us, is the speakership is too important. It shouldn't matter to us who the Speaker of the House is. It should be a job to keep the trains running on time, because the conduct of what Congress does should be happening between the people and their elected representatives, not from the top of the party structure and the dominance of leadership. That's the problem. We need to deconstruct the system responsibly, constitutionally, ethically, but with great passion. And that's why Jim Jordan is despised by many, because that's the kind of guy he's tried to be.
Yeah, he's been that way as he started at the local level, and he went, started as a state rep, then a state senator, and moved his way up through the ranks. He understands it as well as anyone, and his message has remained consistent throughout those years of public service.
So in case people from the Washington Post are listening and you think that your article buried Jim Jordan,
Sorry.
Guess what? Talking about this will cause many more people to rise up and make the decision to be the next Jim Jordan or Jill Jordan or whoever it is, wherever you are, based upon principles. And I will tell you that you may be hearing this and we may disagree on lots of things, but you still believe in what you believe in with all your heart, you should run. You should run. Now, I'm not going to vote for you, but I'm going to admire you, and I'm going to thank you, and I'm going to tell you that what you're doing is every bit as significant as any other form of public service that we reward. Now, you'll get rewarded less than any other form of public service for trying, but you'll be every bit as important. And I'll tell you right now, John Adams and George Washington would thank you, because this is supposed to be a government of the people, by the people and for the people.
All right. Thank you, team. Thank you, Dave, Alan, Rob, Melanie, and we really appreciate it. If you want to respond, you can do it through our website, of course, thepublicsquare.com, where you can hear this program over again or recommend it to others who may have missed this conversation. Thepublicsquare.com. We'll see you next week.
The Public Square is a broadcast service of the American Policy Roundtable.